hosting today's speaker, as well as the exhibit that you're going to have an opportunity to learn a little bit about. I was thrilled to get a call from Jen Knudsen, who's the Assistant Director of the Archaeology Museum, and she told me she had an opportunity for us to host this exhibit here in our new space. We just launched the art space here in the Biomedical Library in November of last year. We had our first exhibit, and I'm thrilled to say we are booked all the way through 2023 and possibly into June of 2024 with exhibits. So the word is getting out, and we welcome you at any time to come and see what we have going on here. And we usually have a reception like this in association with the exhibits. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jen Knudsen, and she'll introduce Dr. Burns here. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Gail. And also Paula Webb is here for helping us to bring this exhibit. I heard someone saying, what is Max Planck? What are Max Planck societies? What does that mean? And a lot of people say institute, but they're societies. And there are several societies in Germany, and they carry out basic research in the life sciences, natural sciences, social and human sciences. So that's what the Max Planck Institute is. I'm also really grateful to Dr. Christine Renee for helping us bring this exhibit to campus. It's supported by a Germany on Campus initiative led by the USA International Studies Program, led by its director, Dr. Christine Renee, who's the Associate Professor of German at South. So thank you so much for helping us to get the funding to bring this exhibit. I went out to the wrong spot here. And I'm Jen. I am the Assistant Director at the Archaeology Museum. And you may be looking around and thinking, what the heck does archaeology have to do with all of these images of science? And so maybe you don't realize that archaeologists are scientists. We're often housed in a humanities department on college campuses. There are some exceptions. But archaeology is the perfect blend of the humanities and the sciences. And I always tell students that of all of the different majors that you can take at South, archaeology is going to be the most multidisciplinary. We borrow from the sciences just as much as we borrow from the humanities. So when it came time to think about a speaker for this exhibit, I thought no one would be better than Dr. Burns. Dr. Burns has had an interesting career. She, where is it? It's on my screen. Okay. So, I lost the paragraph about you.
Do it from your heart.
I'll do it from my heart. And she can probably tell you a lot more about her career. But she is the Archaeology Museum's director, and she's the Associate Professor of Art History at South. So she's also a classically trained archaeologist. So she is perfect person to give a lecture on this exhibit. And we're going to incorporate some of her work on mosaics and talk about this panel to start. So thank you all so much for coming. Again, I just want to thank Dr. Renee, Gail, Paula, and Dr. Burns.
Thank you, Jen. So hello, and I hope everybody's having a wonderful week so far. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about mosaics and grottos. It's caves and mosaics. What do they have to do with each other? Well, it is here with this mosaic, this close-up of a mosaic from Genoa, Italy, made in the 16th century by Galizio Lisi, for a man-made garden grotto or nymphaeum as the Romans often called them, that was used to entertain guests. People could in some of these grottos you could actually swim. In others you might be dining, or you might just be sitting there enjoying the garden, listening to the beautiful sound of the water, maybe meeting your lover out there, in the dark, things like that. So they were used to beautify expensive palaces and villas in Italy and elsewhere, including Versailles, for example, in the 17th century. Now, what does that have to do with Roman mosaics? Well, Italy has a long history of love of grottos and mosaics, often combined together. And I thought today we would spend some time looking at the history of the mosaics that are the predecessors of this stunning mosaic that's made of inlaid, it's shell, maiolica tiles, and crystals. So it's a combination of different media or materials that have been set into a lime background. Okay. So I thought we would take a little look at the past and where this type of mosaic production came from, as well as Italy's love of the grotto or caves, because it has a very long association with them. Let's see if the clicker works. And move, but maybe that works, so 1 out of 2, It's brand new, but for some reason it needs to. Before we start though, I thought, can we make it any darker?
Or kill the lights.
Yeah, or just kill the lights altogether, and I'll try not to move around too much. Well, actually, I'll go back. That's fine. Oh, that's a little better. I think we can see it a little better now. Okay. So I thought before we start talking about its predecessors, we take a little look at the grotto that this mosaic actually came from. Now, this mosaic is part of the Fonte d'Ora, which is the earliest known garden grotto in Genoa. But like I said, they come from a long history in Italy. It just is the earliest one in Genoa. It is a Renaissance grotto. And the whole interior is covered in mosaic, including the floors. Now, there are a variety of different scenes. All of these scenes are based in classical antiquity, so they're all Roman stories, most likely taken from Ovid, Ovid's Metamorphosis, which tells a variety of wonderful tales of transformation. We have a river god sitting here in front of a Roman archway in the background, and then we have a variety of stories being told up here, including, let's see which one's which here. We have, can't I see them very well? I'm too close, I think. Let's see. Oh, that didn't help. I have little pictures, but in the dark I can't see them at all. Anyway, we have Perseus, and finally I see Perseus's hand, so I can figure out which one this was. This is Perseus saving Andromeda from the sea monster. We have Dido and the bull here, and then we have, I'm sorry? Yes, Neptune and the horses here. And here's a closer view of these horses, thank you. And here's a closer view of Perseus and Andromeda. I should have just went to this one, then I could have seen it better. And then we have Polyphemus here with Alatea. And then we also have Deianira, the wife of Heracles, being stolen by Nessos here. So these are the images that decorate the grotto in Genoa. Now, Rome's history with grottos is very long, and this is, we're looking at a reconstruction of the Emperor Tiberius the second emperor of Rome, his grotto at a site called Sperlonga, which is just south of Rome. Rome's here on the Italian Peninsula, and here's Sperlonga, just south of there, just about halfway, a little more than halfway between Rome and Naples. And this grotto, we know a fair amount about, actually. We know that now I should say before we talk about this grotto that Tiberius, when he became emperor, he hated Rome and he hated his mom. And so he did everything he could to avoid both. And so he lived first at Sperlonga and then at Capri. And so this is where basically the capital of Rome was in the beginning of the 1st century CE. Now, Tiberius became Roman emperor in 14, following the death of his stepfather, Augustus. Now, we know from the historians Tacitus and Suetonius that Tiberius loved to entertain his guests here at Sperlonga, and that the beautiful dining room, which was in fact a cave, was called the grotto, and it was so famous that people didn't refer to it as Tiberius's villa, they just called it the grotto, the whole palatial complex. And it is here that we are told that Tiberius entertained his guests. So this is the palace here. There is a set of stairways that lead down to it. This area here is the main part of the grotto. And then you have a dining area, or triclinia. It's called a triclinia because you would have 3 couches organized in this. And then this one here is Scylla. Both stories from Homer's Odyssey. And there are several more pieces of sculpture from this cave, but unfortunately it's in even poorer condition than these 2 are. Now, we are told by Tacitus and Suetonius that in 26 CE, this beautiful grotto came crashing down literally on top of Tiberius and his guests. And several people died, guests and servants died in the collapse. Tiberius, luckily for him, his his Praetorian guard, Sejanus, was able to save him, cover him up, and protect him from the falling stones. So he did survive, even though other people were killed during this collapse. And it seems at this time that Tiberius completely abandoned the site of Sperlonga, and the villa went into disrepair from that point. And the sculptures were buried until a freeway or highway was being built through this area, and this grotto was again rediscovered. Now, Tiberius's love of the grotto was not diminished in any means by this accident that he had at Sperlonga. Instead of moving somewhere safer, he instead moved to the island of Capri, where he took several villas and created a large entertainment complex for himself. And there were several grottos included in this complex that were around the island. And the most famous of these, which is still enjoyed by tourists all the time if you go to Capri, is the Blue Grotto. And the Blue Grotto was used more as a swimming pool than a dining room like the one at Sperlonga. We know that they would swim here. There's ledges where you could relax and hang out with your friends before you took another dip. And it's known for this beautiful blue water. And it's so hard to enter that when you go even today, you have to lay down in the boats as they go under the entranceway. So it's very confined when you get to get into it. Now, these beautiful grottos today, when we look at them, all we see is the interior of the cave walls. But these caves, not only would they have been covered in sculpture, but they would have been covered in mosaic as well. The Mosaic tradition by the time of Tiberius' reign was very popular in Rome, and it had been long since established. And so these would have been covered in mosaics, and the floors in the dining room at Sperlonga would have had mosaics, mostly of stone, maybe some glass. The Romans did like to make glass, and so they would have used some glass, and other things like shells could also be used. But being that this is an imperial residence, only the finest materials would have been chosen: granites, marbles, things like that. Now, where did the Romans learn their mosaic making from? Well, the history of mosaics in the Mediterranean region actually comes from Mesopotamia, off the Mediterranean, but it's probably from here that the Mediterranean peoples learned the art of mosaic making. And these are cone mosaics from the Anu temple complex at Uruk in southern Mesopotamia, Samaria. And they date to around 3200 BCE. I'm sorry, I put BC there. BCE, I should say. Same thing. Same meaning, or same date, I should say, not same meaning. They are basically clay cones that are made in different colors. They can be painted, or they can use natural colors, natural clay colors, but most of them are probably painted. And then the pointed part here are set into a mortar against the walls. And so these are primarily wall mosaics, and they were used to make geometric decorations to decorate the temple walls, like you see here on this model. More than 2,500 years later, the art of mosaic making again became popular, and we find mosaics being made at, find my spot here, in Phrygia, in Gordium, in Phrygia in Asia Minor, modern Turkey, and those mosaics were pebble mosaics. And it's from here that the Greeks, who had colonized the coastline of Asia Minor, probably learned their mosaic making skills, and they began producing pebble mosaics in around the 5th century BC. By far the best known of those pebble mosaics are the ones from Pella. Pella was Alexander the Great's capital in Macedonia, and these mosaics date to around 300 BCE. They show two men, perhaps twins. Some scholars believe that they are the Dioscoroi, the brothers of Helen of Troy, Castor and Pollux, and one of them was a divine and the other was mortal. Pollux was the divine one. Other scholars have argued that these two figures are actually Alexander and Hephaestion, his close friend. Unfortunately, we'll never know the answer to that. But these are made of pebbles. They are typically they use black, gray, red pebbles. Sometimes they'll use little pieces of glass for like the eyes to give it a little shimmer. They will often outline the different figures with terracotta and lead strips to make them stand out. There's actually another one of these. This is the stag hunt with figures that look identical, probably the same figures. This one's actually signed by the artist Knossos, and it comes from the house of the abduction of Helen, which is part of the reason that people think it might be her brothers, the Dioscoroi. Now, the way that these were made is that this panel, which is called the emblema, would be put together in, we believe, the master's workshop. Meanwhile, his employees would be putting together all of the surrounding area. They may be vegetal patterns like this, or more simple, like this restored pebbles that you see here in the museum, something simple like that. And then once the mosaic, the surrounding mosaic was set, then the emblema would become and put into place. And like I said, these are all pebbles, so these are natural river pebbles that they're using here. Now, the Greeks brought the pebble mosaics to southern Italy and Sicily, where they began colonizing in the 8th century BCE. However, they are not the only ones that colonized, especially Sicily. The Carthaginians also colonized this area of Italy, or Sicily in this case. There's a few colonies up on the boot of Italy, but most of the Carthaginian colonies were in Sicily. And these Carthaginian colonies, like the Greek colonies, brought their art with them, and it included a different type of mosaic, what we call a tessera mosaic. And so these are cut stones, sometimes terracotta. You can have glass in it as well. The Carthaginians didn't use, at least in the 5th century BC, didn't use quite as much glass, although there was some natural glass around, I suppose they could use. But these were set into a mortar pavement. Now, this is the Tanit mosaic, one of the earliest mosaics we have from Carthage. Carthage, by the way, is in northern Africa, what is modern Tunisia today. And these mosaic artists would have went, to Sicily, where they began constructing mosaics very similar to this. Most Carthaginian mosaics were abstract designs. Why the Greek mosaics often, why they did like vegetable mosaics, they tended to have more figures in them. Oops, wrong way. There we go. Then comes the Romans. Now, the Romans first conquered southern Italy and then Sicily they were in Sicily beginning in 246 BCE. And they then moved on. They didn't stop, and as you might know, they didn't stop in southern Italy and Sicily, they moved on. And in 146, they conquered both Carthage, who had been their longtime rivals. Rome has a long tradition of their wars, or the Punic Wars they're called, with Carthage. And in 146 BC, Rome sacks Carthage and burns it to the ground. In that same year, they take control of Greece and put it under their protection. And then a few years later, in 133, they take over the Aegean Islands. By 31 BC, when they defeat Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium off the coast of Greece, they control almost all of the Mediterranean. In 30 BC, when Cleopatra kills herself, they control all of the Mediterranean. And after they have dominated these regions, they begin importing the art, the craftsmen, the architects, and, most importantly for us, the mosaics of these cultures. Now, the Romans often get accused of being copyists. They go into a place, they find the best, and they bring it home with them. And they did. But the Romans also brought it home and figured out how they can make it better. And it's exactly what they did with mosaics. First of all, they combined the beautiful tesserae, or cut stone mosaic of the Carthaginians, with the figural mosaics of the Greeks. They make them more sturdy than they had ever been before. Now, this is a wall mosaic. This is the Nile mosaic from the Sanctuary of Fortuna at Praeneste, which is modern Palestrina, just southeast of Rome. So it's right here. It was often visited by wealthy Romans who were expecting their first child in hopes that their first child would have a good fortune in life. It is a large complex built on a hillside, and under it is a series of rooms, including a natural grotto, and in that grotto was this mosaic. It is a fairly early Roman mosaic itself, so it was a very important a part of Rome, even before it actually physically became part of Rome. And this mosaic represents that annual flooding of the Nile, which would have given Rome very good fortune indeed once it owned Egypt. Now, what makes these mosaics better than the mosaics of the Greeks or the Carthaginians? Well, I would argue Rome's efficiency at building concrete. Modern concrete lasts a few decades. Roman concrete lasts 2,000 years, like these two, the Colosseum and the Pantheon, both built in Rome's early imperial periods. Now, Rome, it's actually been in the news a lot lately, the use of lime chunks in the concrete, and this made Rome's concrete much stronger because it would actually expand and fill in cracks as they were formed. So that is the latest theory as to why Rome's concrete is so good. And then they also use pozzolana volcanic ash as well that helped us, that certainly didn't hurt. But how does that relate to mosaics? Well, the same techniques used to make Roman concrete were used in Roman mosaic production. Now this shows how you lay a Roman mosaic floor. It is no just simple, you don't just lay the mortar down, put the stones in and be done. At least that's not how Vitruvius, the 1st century BCE author, tells us that we do it. He describes everything. Vitruvius describes everything from how to build a temple, to laying a floor, to painting a wall. And he tells us that if you want a good Roman mosaic to decorate your floor, this is what you have to do. He says you must first start with a statuette, which is this layer down here, which has fist-sized chunks of stone and terracotta pieces, probably taken from broken bricks. And you mix this, a 3-to-1 ratio, with 2/5 lime and 1/3 crushed tile. Then comes the rudis, this one. So not quite as bulky as the statuette, but this is about a 20 to 30 centimeter thick layer of broken terracotta brick and lime that is then beat into a solid mass. And apparently you need quite a good labor force, we are told by Vitruvius, to do this. Then you have the nucleus here, which is even finer. And the nucleus is a layer of pounded tile and lime in a 3-to-1 ratio. Finally, you have the supranucleus here. And the supranucleus is made of marble dust and lime and is laid over the level nucleus. So you need to make your nucleus level. Okay? Then you lay this supranucleus over it, and then you set your tesserae, your little cut stones. It could be cut stones, again, it could be glass, but they're hand cut. They're not natural pebbles like the Greeks were using. So somebody has to sit there with little pincers and cut little bits of stone. And you put that into the supranucleus. And then once you've done that, just like our tile floors of today, you use a grout, which is made of sifted marble powder and lime, a mixture of marble powder, lime, and sand, which is used to fill in all the little gaps or interstices that are in between all of those little tesserae. The results make up a layer of pavement, or a different layer, or a different type. The result is you get layers beneath the pavement itself, making it more durable. And this is a model from a museum showing you the mosaic and then the different levels here. And then this is an actual Roman mosaic, and you can see all the different levels that were used to create this mosaic. This is why their mosaics last so long. And no matter where you travel in the Roman Empire, you will find Roman mosaics. Sometimes that's all that remains of a building, is its mosaic. They used them in baths, they used them in homes. In England, they often use them to in their dining rooms. Well, they use them in dining rooms almost everywhere, but in England, they could actually heat them, so your dining room would be nice and toasty, which, wet, especially along the Hadrian's Wall there, was very important. They heated their baths, and they would put these floors on inside the baths, the hot baths called the caldarium, and they were so hot that you had to wear flip-flops to walk on them because they would get so hot. So they had a variety of purposes and were used in almost every type of Roman building. Sometimes they were simple, just cut stones for walking on in a walkway. Sometimes they were extremely elaborate figural mosaics like these. Sometimes they're very intricate vegetable mosaics. So some of the more common types of Roman mosaics are called opus testellatum, which is really, you could use that to describe any cut stone mosaic. But when we talk about Roman mosaics, we usually use it to describe mosaics using larger tesserae, and I did bring some pictures of these different types in. Opus sectile, which is a high-end cut stone, usually cut into different geometric shapes, put together to create different patterns. And then the most expensive, the opus vermiculatum, which actually means as the worm crawls. And it refers to the fact that it's about 30 cubes per square centimeter. So you can imagine how tiny that is, how tiny these little cubes are. And because the cubes were so tiny, they could do a lot of shading and a lot of details that they couldn't do with the larger tesserae. But this was very detail-oriented, and only the wealthiest could have afforded this type of tile. So I brought a few of these in for you to see. This is opus sectile, those big pieces of marble and granites that were cut to decorate wealthy homes. This is from the Emperor Hadrian's villa at Tivoli, an amazing site. If you have never been, I always tell people it should be on your list of things to visit in Italy. It is absolutely stunning. And Hadrian was a big fan of this. He also used this technique in the Pantheon itself. So when you go to the Pantheon, this is the type of form you see. Opus testellatum is used here on this mosaic, and you can see how big the tesserae here are on. This is a mosaic showing Orpheus here, Orpheus charming animals. Orpheus is the lyre player that his song was so beautiful that it could control the nature and even charm the gods of the underworld. This one is from southwest Great Britain, where it was laid in a wealthy Roman home around 300 CE. Now this one is the opus vermiculatum. This is the one that's about 30 of those tiny, tiny little tesserae in every square centimeter. Matter of fact, when you look at it like this, you can't even see the individual tesserae. My old professor, when I was taking Roman archaeology, used to say that you could put 100 on his thumbnail. I don't know if that was accurate or not, but they are very, very tiny. And when you see this mosaic, it's from the House of the Faun in Pompeii, but today, if you want to see it, you have to go to the Naples Museum, the Archaeology Museum in Naples. But you have to get pretty close to it to see the beautiful individual tesserae. And so you can see why they called it as the worm crawls, because it was only like the size of the inchworm, the little interstices, the little pieces, or little gaps in between it. And it just really creates a very detailed mosaic. This particular mosaic shows Alexander's defeat of the Persian king Darius at the Battle of Issus. Alexander was very common among Romans due to the military nature of Rome and the exceptional logistics abilities of Alexander. Now, we return to the placing of these beautiful mosaics into grottos. Tiberius loved his natural grottos. But what do you do if you want a wee bit safer location, where it's not going to fall in on your head? And you want it in downtown Rome? Well, you build it, right? There are no, at least that I know, no natural grottos in downtown Rome in the 1st century CE. And so if you wanted, you better build it, and that's exactly what Nero did. Nero, the famous or infamous emperor who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned, although in fact, if he did this, he played a liar. He built two houses in downtown Rome. The first was the Domus Transitoria. I did not bring any images of the Domus Transitoria because very little of it remains. It's mostly buried underneath the palace that's on the Palatine today. It was destroyed by the Great Fire of '64, where Nero supposedly fiddled. And he replaced it with an even larger complex called the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House, that was constructed by the architects Severus and Keller between 64 and 69, when Nero was forced to commit suicide. Now, unfortunately, the Domus Aurea is in slightly better condition than the Domus Transitoria, but it's not in the greatest condition. Rome's hate of Nero quickly led them to bury the majority of it and build on top of it. Only this one wing survives, and it today has Trajan's baths built on top of it. But you can go visit it. Ironically, even though I'm sure Nero thought it was safer in his day, today when you go, you have to wear hard hats because the whole thing is underground. So even though it was a man-made grotto when Nero built it, today it is in fact the real deal. It's been, well, I guess it's still man-made, but it's a grotto under the ground now because it has been buried. So you're looking at the Nymphaeum, or it's called a Nymphaeum, but it means it's like a swimming pool, fountain house that Nero would have used to entertain guests. Typically the imagery surrounding it often has to do with nymphs or stories of the sea, although well, I guess it is a story of the sea. In this case, remember I showed you the blinding of Polyphemus, the blinding of the great Cyclops? That's actually what is depicted in this little rondel up here. And the whole thing would have been covered again in mosaics. Unfortunately, not a lot of those mosaics remain. This chunk that you're looking at up here remains. Yes.
I was just curious because you were saying that the Tiberius's first grotto was rediscovered when they were building a highway. Mm-hmm. But I guess it's hard for me to believe that. I know it's thousands of years, but it's still generations of people that lived in that vicinity. Mm-hmm. And there's no oral tradition, there's no oral history of the fact that this thing was there.
They would have known about the general complex. It's pretty hard most of the time, unless you have a volcano, to hide the whole complex. Right. So they probably knew that there was a large villa there. Because the villa actually is on the plateau overlooking the ocean. And then you have to kind of walk down to from the villa to the grotto. And so they would have known that there was a large villa there. I don't think it was until the discovery of the grotto itself that they knew it was Tiberius's villa. I mean, I'm sure that there might be some scholar out there that's convinced it's not Tiberius's villa, but everything fits the mold. You know, the broken sculpture, the collapsed ceiling, the dating of the concrete. So most likely it was Tiberius's. So the grotto itself, I just think it was so collapsed that they just, they couldn't get inside of it until you had the modern technology to, I mean they could, but it would have been very dangerous. And so they may have even known there was something, I mean the locals may have known something was there. They may have even gotten inside, just like Nero's Golden Palace, Raphael used to jump down inside with his buddies and tour the palace all the time. He knew it was down there, and then he'd find little holes, and they'd use ropes, and they'd drop down and look all over. And that's why if you go to the Vatican today, a lot of Raphael's paintings that decorate the Vatican are based on the paintings he saw in Nero's palace. So the locals may have known that there was something there, but it wasn't until this highway came through that they suddenly, oh, this is more than just a little cave. This is something that we really need to take a look at. And it's actually a very hotly debated site. The sculptures are hotly contested whether or not they're made for Tiberius or if he brought them from Rhodes, and they're much earlier work. So it's a very interesting site.